And good evening, everybody. Well, UKIP have their big EGM this weekend. The question is, should Henry Bolton stay or should he go as leader of UKIP? And I tonight want to conduct with you a Twitter poll. So, using the hashtag Farage and LBC, you can vote yes, he should stay, or no, he should go. And you can do that by going to on Twitter at LBC or at Nigel_Farage. Tell me, yes, he should stay. No, he should go. And that Twitter poll will close at 10 to 8 tonight. Now, overnight, obviously, you've seen these horrendous events that have taken place in Florida. And I'm going to go to Simon Marks for him to give me an update on what the political ramifications of all of this have been in the USA today. Simon.
Nigel, this was the fourth time President Trump has had to interrupt his day to speak publicly after an incident of mass gun violence in America. He said the nation is in grief and collectively sharing one heavy heart.
To every parent, teacher and child who is hurting so badly, we are here for you, whatever you need, whatever we can do to ease your pain.
He spoke directly to the nation's children.
You have people who care about you, who love you, and who will do anything at all to protect you.
And he vowed to lead a task force aimed at making America's schools safe, with a particular focus on mental illness.
We are committed to working with state and local leaders to help secure our schools and tackle the difficult issue of mental health.
That he called his government's top priority, but he never referred to the ability of 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, now facing 17 charges of premeditated murder, legally to acquire an AR-15 assault rifle, the same kind of gun used in earlier massacres in Las Vegas, Texas, Orlando, and at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. While the president said nothing about gun control, Paul Ryan, the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives, indicated his opposition to any talk of tighter laws.
This is not the time to jump to some conclusion, not knowing the full facts.
But other Republicans are wobbling. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, a top member of the Trump cabinet, indicated he thinks Congress now needs to take the issue on. And Republican Governor of Florida Rick Scott, at the scene of the school shooting, connected the dots between the mentally ill suspect and his ability to acquire a weapon.
If we have somebody that's mentally ill, they can't have access to a gun. I don't want my children, your children, my grandchildren, your grandchildren, ever anything to go through like this.
Many students at the school say they weren't entirely surprised by Wednesday's attack. They had joked with one another that if anyone was going to attack the school, it would be Nicholas Cruz, a former student and loner with a deeply troubled disciplinary record. And those students who lived through the assault are becoming vocal advocates of the need to address the easy availability of guns, at least in Florida. David Hogg is one of them, and he spoke to CNN.
What we really need is action, because we can say, yes, we're going to do all these things, thoughts and prayers. What we need more than that is action. We're children. You guys are the adults. You need to take some action and play a role. Work together, come over your politics, and get something done.
But none of that changes the political equation here. The all-powerful National Rifle Association remains a moneyed and articulate advocate of gun rights that it insists are rooted in the Second Amendment to America's Constitution. President Trump says he'll visit the scene of the attack and offer the nation's support to the grief-stricken after this, the 18th school shooting in the United States so far this year. Nigel?
Well, it's an appalling incident. 17 dead, 50 injured at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. But when you really look at the numbers and the frequency of this, it becomes very sobering indeed, because this is the 18th incident in which a gun has been discharged on a school campus in the USA this year. That's right, this year. We're only in the middle of February. Now, in terms of history, the worst ever was the Sandy Hook Elementary School back in 2012, when, 20 were killed, 20 children were killed and 6 adults were killed. And since 2013, there have been 290 incidents in which a gun was discharged on a school campus in America. So these are truly horrifying figures, not just what happened yesterday, but the sheer frequency with which this is taking place. There is clearly a massive, massive problem in the States with this. You've heard what the president had to say. Simon Marks made it very clear that Second Amendment rights in America, the right to bear arms, is something that people there hold very, very dear. But I think there's something about this one that is different. I really, really do. And I suspect there is going to be a very big hue and cry after this, not about Second Amendment rights so much, although, of course, there are clearly two very passionate sides of that debate. But I think over the internet, because there is something here. And I think there's going to be a really, really big stink about this, because YouTuber Ben Benite was talking with this guy Cruz that committed this awful crime. And Cruz himself said he wanted to become a professional school shooter. Now, Benite says he reported this comment to the FBI. He says the FBI interviewed him about it. And so it looks like the FBI investigated these comments made by Nicholas Cruz online, and yet they have not acted. And I suspect there is going to be one hell of a row over that. Indeed, I think there should be a hell of a row over that. And I wonder more broadly, you know, what's going on here? I mean, what do you put this never-ending series of gun crimes in American schools and elsewhere down to? Is it simply a case that America doesn't have sufficient gun controls? And if that's your view, call me on 0345 6060 973, or perhaps, like the president, you think this is a mental health issue and that's what needs dealing with, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe you think that this is really to do with the internet. There's too much content out there poisoning minds, and something has to be done, not just to regulate that content, but to deal with people like Cruz who make comments like this upon which the authorities didn't act. And if that's how you feel, then tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. I'm going to go to Adam in Manchester, a new caller to the show. Adam, good evening. What do you put it down to?
Good evening, Nigel. Well, in my opinion, I think it comes quite simply down to the accessibility of firearms in America, because they just seem to have a love affair for them, basically. Because you can spout all these different things about, you know, mental health and content on the internet and all that kind of stuff, but those sort of things, they're common in a lot of other countries. The only and not necessarily common with the individual incidents that happen in America. The only common thing that's happened in America is these people have had access to guns. And I think that's the main driver of it.
Yeah, and it's not just guns, Adam, is it? It is repeating rifles, and of course, remember that appalling case that happened in Las Vegas not so long ago. I mean, effectively, he'd managed to convert those assault rifles effectively into machine guns, hadn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And then what? Just that following week, they were talking in Congress about relaxing constraints on suppressors to try and make it a bit less noisy. I mean, where's the sense in that? I think like the main drive, a big drive of this is as well as the NRA. How powerful they are, how much money they've got to spend on lobbying constantly. I think it's like $250 million, something like that, a year. They just spend constantly.
I do think, I mean, it was Stephen Paddock who was the man that opened fire, if you remember, from that hotel window. 58 killed, 800 injured. And there was talk, as I say, of making that converter more difficult or illegal to obtain. But in general terms, Adam, you know, the NRA is very powerful in America. And, you know, the American Constitution, the right to bear arms, is something that people hold very dear. Now, that doesn't mean, Adam, that there can't be restrictions, it seems to me, on who is able to buy guns according to their record, according to their mental capabilities. But the idea, if anyone thinks that there's going to be legislation that stops Americans buying guns, Adam, it ain't going to happen.
Well, that's the thing. I think if Sandy Hook wasn't enough, these children were 5, 6, and 7-year-olds. If that wasn't enough to change their minds, then very bleak outlook on it. I don't think that country's got any hope of avoiding such things happening in the future.
Well, as I say, I mean, you know, this already, unbelievably, is the 18th incident in a school this year. Adam, I thank you for your call. Jerry is calling from Heathrow, another new caller to the Nigel Farage Show. Good evening, Jerry.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm okay. I do think this one's different, Jerry. I do think that if the FBI were tipped off that somebody had or said they were going to become a school shooter, something should have been done.
Absolutely. I mean, if this is not a major wake-up call in that respect, then I don't know what is. And also, I'm hearing that pupils themselves at the school had already, it was popular knowledge that if anybody was going to do this, it was this guy. Well, I'm afraid that fellow students are going to have to get proactive in this and actually put their hand up to the authorities and say, I'm seriously worried about this guy, because ultimately they could pay the price with their life, couldn't they?
Well, there were a lot of warnings, weren't there? I mean, he was expelled from the school. He was expelled for getting into a fight with his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend. Well, you might think that's not particularly unusual amongst teenagers. That kind of happens. Yeah. But, after that, he became very volatile. He ended, friendships with a lot of people. And as you say, in Simon Marks's report, they'd even joked that if anyone was going to do it, it was going to become this guy who'd got odder and odder and odder. And then, but the most devastating thing is the police say they're now going to dissect Cruz's internet history and social media. But he'd already put out the warning there. He'd said himself a few months ago he wanted to be a professional school shooter. YouTuber Ben Benite reported him to the FBI, and nothing happened, Jerry.
I know, it's completely shocking. And he did everything apart from drive around the town firing a weapon out of the window, But the other aspect to this all is the kind of firearms that the Americans seem to embrace so lovingly. I was a military man for 24 years. Guns were part of my life on an almost daily basis. But people who have a morbid fascination with weaponry, I find personally terrifying.
Yes, and of course there's no limit to the amount you can own. Jerry, I thank you for your call. But yes, this is different. Folks, this one is different. This debate, I think, will be less about gun control in the days to come, but more about the failure of the authorities to act, despite the fact they were very clearly warned about this guy Cruz. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:16. UKIP have their big EGM this Saturday. The question is, should Henry Bolton stay or should he go? And I'm conducting a Twitter poll with you. We'll run it through until 10 to 8 tonight. So using the hashtag Farage on LBC, and you can go to @LBC or @Nigel_Farage, and you can say yes, he should stay, or no, he should go. And after our first quarter of an hour of the poll, 23% of you think he should stay, and at the moment the rest of you, the other 77%, think he should go. But back to our main subject tonight. It is 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, who was expelled from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and yesterday he killed 17 people, at least 17 people, and there are 50 people injured, some of them in a life-threatening condition. And it is extraordinarily, it seems to me, the 18th incident in which a gun has been discharged on a school campus in the US this year, and we're only in the middle of February. What do you put it down to? James in Harlow, a new caller to the show. What do you put it down to, James?
Well, as much as I think Americans are stupid about the way they handle guns, I don't actually think the guns are relevant. They're just distracting from the real issue. And that's the same as is in Britain with knives.
Yes.
That is, there's a group of individuals that has gotten bigger and bigger over the decades that have basically been failed, abused, and they just want, half the time it feels like they're projecting their misery in their own head onto the world. They want you to understand what's going on in their minds. Does that make sense, kind of?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I've got a tweet that's come in here that says, so your callers want to ban guns, rifles in the US. Will they also support the total ban of knives and acid in the UK? Stop attacking the US gun lobby and start cleaning up the UK. So, yeah, you're not the only person, James, that sees the parallels between the two problems. All I would say, James, is that appalling though the knife attacks and murders in London and other parts of the country are, the sheer scale of devastation that is caused by some of these repeating rifles is of a bigger magnitude, isn't it?
That is relevant, but not to what the topic of what's causing it is, just what's doing the damage. The guns are what's doing the damage, or what's causing these people to want to do the damage. That's I mean, realistically, we're talking about it with guns, right?
Yeah.
Realistically, what if they decided to use bombs instead of guns? How much more damage would that do? A lot.
No. So James, so is President Trump right? Is this a mental health breakdown that's occurring amongst a section of our society?
Not necessarily. What I mean by this is, if I was Trump, this is what I would do. I'd get both parties together. I'd get the NSA, the Health Authority, social services leaders, every single shooting victim, put them on a table, analyse their lives down to the last speck, and you will find the same patterns. What they need to do is get all these victims and analyse every aspect of their lives. And if I may, I've had some experience with this, actually. So can I introduce that quickly?
Yeah, go on.
My family are criminals. I'm the one of about 20 who's not. All of them organised criminals. They're off touch to authorities, same as they are in America. These people do that to their children, pass it on. We end up with communities that are broken down, and we end up with this. Same country, same as the states in London that are off limits. It's been going on for decades, Nigel. I'll give you an example, right? My sister, she phoned. I used to work at a council office. Now, as you know, threatening to blow up a public building, that should be classed as terrorism, shouldn't it?
It certainly should be, yeah.
Right, well, my sister sent in a text message to me in work saying she was going to blow up the building with me in it. The police said, because of these, and I agree with you, online laws and text laws need to be changed immediately. Because it was on texting online on Facebook, it was not classed as submittable evidence to be used in a criminal case at the time.
Well, it should be, shouldn't it? Because actually, yeah, of course it should be. It's the same as saying something, isn't it? James, I think, I mean, and I'm sure you're right, there are problem families and this sort of pattern of violent behaviour, lack of respect, and all of it goes on. But I do think in this case, what this has highlighted, James, and you say you saw it in a case with your family, what this has highlighted particularly is somebody specifically says he wants to become a school shooter. That individual clearly has had a recent disturbed past, and the FBI, it looks to me, have failed everybody. James, I thank you. I've got, when the American Constitution was written, guns were not as powerful as they are now, says Russell from Basildon. Russell, you're right. You know, the right to bear arms, fine, you know, for protection, for hunting, for whatever it may be, but it's not the same, is it, as buying, you know, an automatic repeating rifle. Yes, the FBI have questions to answer, and this is playing right into your hands to try and discredit them because they are going after Trump. Well, you can read conspiracy into this if you want to, and it may well be true that the president has had his problems with the authorities in the USA, but I think actually whoever sent that tweet, this would appear to me to be a real problem for the FBI, and the investigation into Trump has got nothing to do with that at all. I hope that at Real Donald Trump will do something more noticeable to curb gun laws. Every time this happens, people talk about curbing gun laws in America, and yes, of course, I certainly believe there should be restrictions on what type of guns can be sold. But remember this, even if you ban the sale of guns in America tomorrow, there are still 150 million guns out there in circulation. You wouldn't stop the problem. I wonder what Valentine, who's calling from Bromley, thinks. Good evening, Valentine.
Good evening, Nigel. I think ultimately the problem lies with the access to guns and as opposed to the mental condition of the American population. Because every country in the world has issues, you know, with mental health. But the major difference is the access to guns, and hence the epidemic in America and all the tragedies. I spoke to you last year in regards to the Las Vegas shooting.
Right.
At the time, I was completely of the view, like everyone else naturally, well, most people in the UK who don't understand gun violence in America, that it needs to be stopped. You know, we need to curb. They need to curb, make gun control restrictions, and therefore, hopefully, that would resolve the issue. But like you just rightly said, even if you were to ban all the guns tomorrow, there are still a load of guns in circulation, one. And two, like we regularly hear the NRA say, bad guys will get guns one way or the other, and it will just stop good guys from having guns. So I hate to say it, I've become desensitized to these mass shootings, and I'm starting to understand the NRA point of view. It might just be a case that they just arm everyone within reason, so that, you know, when someone goes into the school like, you know, this guy has done yesterday, there will be a teacher somewhere who will, you know, fire back and hopefully kill the assailant and save lives.
Yeah, I mean, this was the argument, Valentine, that some used after the horrific terrorist attacks in Paris. The argument being that if some Parisians had carried handguns, they could have stopped it happening more quickly. I do understand the argument, but I worry if you arm everybody, you up the ante and you make the use of guns even more frequent, Valentine, than it is right now.
I completely agree with you that is, unintended side effect that you must worry about with that type of strategy. But, you know, with the strength of the NRA and the lobbying power that they have, and that naturally comes from the American people. The American people are the NRA. The NRA are the American people, you know, apart from if you're a detractor. But with the strength they have, guns will never go leave America. They will fight strenuously for their right to bear arms. So as a pragmatist, you just think, you might, at this stage now, it might be a case that everyone is just armed within reason.
It's a very interesting point of view, Valentine. It's certainly looking through this problem through the other end of the telescope. I thank you for your call. I get on Twitter, how can you realistically carry on a debate about the shooting in America without mentioning he was a member of a far-right group? Come on, LBC, this cannot be allowed. We don't know the truth of that. What we do know is there are various news sites saying he may have had links to white supremacists. Well, I tell you what, if that's the case, then the FBI have failed even worse than I thought they had. Because what they could have found out very easily once he'd been reported is not only was he saying disturbing things online, but he'd been expelled from a school. He'd lost many of his friends over the course of the last few months because of his erratic behavior. And if indeed, with a quick check online, they could have linked him to extremist groups, even more reason I would have thought that something should have happened. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:30. And on Saturday, UKIP have their big EGM. They're going to vote, debate whether Henry Bolton should stay as UKIP leader. And tonight here on LBC, we're conducting a Twitter poll on that subject. So if you want to get yourself involved with this, using the hashtag Farage and LBC, you can vote yes, he should stay, or no, he should go. And you can do that using on @LBC or @Nigel_Farage. And you are participating in very large numbers. And halfway through, and this poll closes at 10 to 8, halfway through, 25% of you think he should stay, and 75% of you think no, he should go. Something else that caught my eye today that I thought was very interesting was a comment by Sir Peter Bottomley, veteran MP, who said there was now growing support among Tory MPs for reform of the voting system. My ears pricked up. Gosh, are we going to get rid of the redundant, out-of-date, first-past-the-post system that disengages so many? No, this is the lowering of the voting age from 18 to 16. And Bottomley makes the point that the Labour Party would support it, the minority party and nationalists would support it, and it would appear now quite a lot of Tories would. Even looks like the former Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, seems to think that 16-year-olds should have the vote. Justine Greening, who lost her post recently as Education Secretary, she said she's open to the idea. It may well be that votes for 16-year-olds are going to be on the agenda before very long. I have to say, I personally think it's a very bad idea. I don't think you should be able to vote in elections that you're not eligible to stand for. And I don't think, at least I wouldn't believe, many of you would think that we should have 16-year-olds standing as members of Parliament. And for that reason, if no other, I will oppose it. But hey, this one is going to run and run. And of course, many of the Ramonas, call them what you will, think that so many of the youngsters think the EU referendum has been a bad thing, which, given the way they're taught at schools, is probably not very surprising. And that's one of the reasons why they're encouraging it so much. an argument, a debate for another day. But what we're discussing tonight, of course, is this atrocity. Nicholas Cruz, killing 17 people, injuring 50 at a school in Florida. The 18th incident where a gun has been discharged at a school in America so far this year, and we're only in the middle of February. What do we put it down to? Is it a lack of gun controls? Too many guns in America? Is it a big mental health issue? Or is it something to do with disturbing material being easily available on the internet, and worse than that, people using the internet declaring, as this guy did, that he wanted to be a school shooter, and the authorities, despite him being reported to them, not acting? And I predict that's where this row is going to go in America over the course of the next few days. David is calling from Farnham, a new caller to the show. Good evening, David.
Evening, Nigel. Thanks for having me on. I was just thinking, sadly, it's a few years since I was allowed to vote, but we won't get into that. The gun control thing, to me, it's the accessibility of weapons. My own opinion is that weapons should only be allowed by the military and police. I did spend some time at Officer College in the Air Force, where we were given a certain amount of weapons training, and you're talking about, say, a class of educated people, and there's always one in the class who sort of went against the rules when the instructor wasn't looking and mucked around with things, even though you're told not to point them at someone. And unfortunately, guns play to the male ego. And the old adage that they offer protection is a load of nonsense, because if you actually look at the figures, more people die as a result of gunshots in their own home from a result of a family member than they do from an external person trying to get in. Yeah. And this thing that Trump mentioned today, I think he's just trying to deflect the problem, saying it's a mental issue. Well, again, it's people with mental issues being able to get hold of them. But I think he's trying to deflect away from the fact that the NRA is such a powerful voice in America. I remember years ago, and Reagan was again against gun control, and he actually got shot himself. And I think he took some steps to try and tighten up. But it's just ingrained in the American culture. They just won't change. I think it's their...
Well, David, it is part of their constitution, and they do value and believe in their constitution. They're taught it at their schools, at their colleges. And, the right to bear arms has been there, from the very beginning. Now, one of the points, of course, that was made earlier on is that the ability of weapons to cause mass injuries is much bigger now than it was all those years ago. But, David, I'm interested in, you make this point at the start of your comments where you said that you thought the only people that should carry guns should be the military, the police. So, David, would you prohibit someone like me from owning a shotgun?
Well, I think they should be strictly controlled. I think shotguns, I'm anti-hunting myself, but farmers possibly have a necessity to use them for keeping pests down, but again, it's something where they could call in people, because I lived in New Zealand, which again is a country with far less gun control than here. And again, if you look at the figures there, far more people, as a peaceful country, die as a result of weapons being discharged. And, you can go out in the forest there and you get people pig hunting with no sort of control. So someone could innocently wander into where people are shooting at pigs or
all right, David, you may have an objection to wild boar hunting or pheasant shooting or whatever it may be. I don't, but you may have an objection to it. But I could be a clay pigeon shot, couldn't I? That could be my hobby. I want to go on a Sunday morning and shoot.
I see the point, but what I'm saying is that the guns need to be locked up at the end of the day, not kept in people's houses. It's strict controls where they're kept, and strict controls and where they're fired. It's almost like an exclusion zone around them. So, yes, if someone's got to feel that they can be isolated properly, but obviously it's going to cost money, so people don't like to do it.
Well, the gun controls, David, I can tell you that the gun controls in our country are strong. And if you've got a shotgun, whether you're a clay shot or you want to go and shoot birds or rabbits or whatever it is, you've got to have a special locked gun cabinet. The key has to be kept in a separate place. We do have very, very strict, rules on guns.
So we should, but then there's always people innocently walking across a heath or something that suddenly find themselves being shot at. And then there's a case near me. I live in a peaceful town. A case near me where a guy suddenly was breeding animals, got into a dispute with an ex-girlfriend or something, and kept shotguns for that reason, or for hunting reasons, turned it on this woman and shot her, and the daughter as well. So, like you said, the gun control is strict here, but it still gives people in the public access to guns, and people lose their tempers, get into disputes about things. And guns are designed for killing, either killing something. And so that's, again, a reason why I think they should be severely restricted. And
But David, it's too late in America. There are an estimated 150 million guns in private ownership in America. Even if you stop the sale of guns tomorrow, there's not much you can do about it, is there?
No, I'm not disputing that. I mean, over there, it's got to monumental proportions. To quote you, as the biblical precautions, I think, proportions is what you once said. But,
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying, but...
I do. All right, so anyway, David, what I take from your message is we must not go down the American route. We must keep very, very strict laws in our country. And I'm sure vast majority of people listening to this show will agree with that. Although I do feel slightly sorry for those that want to shoot pistols and represent us in the Olympics who have to go to Paris to be able to practice. Surely a gun club could be able to keep within their premises a pistol. Just a view, not one that everybody supports. Nigel, if the NRA, the National Rifle Association, wants people to have guns, fine. But they must do the background checks, and they need to police the sale of guns or limit everyone to one handgun without modification, says Chris. Chris, the point about modifications, I think, is a very, very powerful one. The Las Vegas massacre, showed that very, very clearly. I called earlier this year, but I hung up because I got nervous. I just want to say this is yet another tragic shooting at a high school, and yet Trump brushes this under the carpet as a case of mental health. He should do more about gun control. Well, fine, but those guns, a lot of guns out there already. Dear Nigel, the NRA, politically powerful American citizens, should ask themselves what sort of society they really want, says John from Wales. Well, from the start, and in their constitution, the right to bear arms was something that people considered to be absolutely key. And to attempt to stop that, to attempt to take that away from people is very, very difficult. I wonder what Liz in Stoke-on-Trent makes of this. Good evening, Liz.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. If you bear with me, if I could make a few points, please. I'll try and be quick. Trump had brought up the point about the mentally ill, but he's the one that lifted the one important law that tightened the purchase and use of guns by the mentally ill, and that was the background check. So now anybody can buy them. That's point one. Yep. Also, the right to bear arms, that dated back to the militia, and I think I'm right.
It is, yeah.
When they were fighting the British. Right, that does not exist now. There is no militia, so that does not apply. Also, there's two things that can be done immediately if Trump wanted to, and that is to ban semi-automatics, because not even hunters need semi-automatics, for goodness sake, and also to reinstate the background check. That's another point. And then there are mentally ill people that are going to fight against society. If there are no guns that are there immediately to hand, they're not going to use them because they can't. They wouldn't be there. Because in the thick of the moment, when they feel down or disturbed or whatever, and they want to get back at somebody, the gun is there. If that didn't exist, there'd be fewer killings.
Of course. Liz, the point you make about background checks in America, you are absolutely right. Those background checks that were brought in under Obama have been eased under this administration. You are factually correct to say that. And I think that with Trump talking about the problem of mental illness, I think they're going to have to rethink that. All right. I genuinely think they're going to have to rethink that. I think they are going to have much better checks on who is able to buy guns. Doesn't solve the problem of how many are out there in circulation. And Liz, where I agree with you completely is, and you make the point that that people carried guns because, as you say, there were militias fighting the British, and you're absolutely right about that. But I do think the fact these semi-automatic weapons are there, available so easily, is pretty crazy. I thank you for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:47. One of the big debates that is going on now in America is about what this young man, Nicholas Cruz, saw on the internet, but also what he said on the internet. And that really is very, very worrying. What do we do about this on the internet? To sort of help me through this is Professor Peter Summer, cybersecurity specialist. Peter, good evening.
Good evening.
So people are very obviously looking at this, and I do think, Peter, after this particular incident, there is going to be a big debate about the role that online content is having, not just with individuals like this, but equally with jihadis or whatever else it may be. I mean, where are we going with this?
Let's look at what's technically possible. If someone has already decided that material is bad for some reason or another, then it's entirely possible to block it. You can block entire websites, and you can block individual files, whether they are documents or photos. And to an extent, we do that already for stuff involving child pornography. So it can easily be extended, and to a certain extent, it is being extended, say, for terrorist material. The difficulty is with material which hasn't been decided is bad, and how one makes that decision. So you can very easily say, okay, if something is obviously illegal, it should be blocked, and that's the approach they're taking in Germany. There's a lot of material which you might regard as extreme or harmful, and that's much trickier, and it seems a little bit difficult to ask, or unreasonable to ask like for Facebook or anybody else to block something on a basis where we ourselves, through our parliament, have not made it absolutely clear what we want to have blocked. That's really the difficulty.
So, in a sense, do you think that the web giants need some direction through legislation?
Well, they do, but we've already tried that. I mean, there's been quite a lot of debate, particularly in the Home Office, about what we mean by extreme and what we mean by harmful. And if you're asking something which is enforceable by courts, it's not just simply a matter of opinion. So the cutoff is the stuff which is obviously bad, and most of that is illegal. There may be an argument for saying that maybe a little bit more should be illegal than actually is. It's the marginal stuff. Let's take the current example, the current sort of issue. Would we regard it as harmful to have articles saying that we in Britain ought to have greater access to firearms? Now, most people might consider it extreme, but they would also say, well, maybe that's impinging on our freedom of expression. And that's, if you like, the difficult thing to do. As far as I understand it, the would-be legislators in the Home Office have struggled with it.
And finally, Peter, presumably, if more pressure is put on the web giants, I guess monitoring all of this and dealing with all of this presumably comes at a very big financial cost to them.
It does. You will have noticed the Home Secretary extolling the virtue of artificial intelligence over the last few days. Some of us who know a bit about artificial intelligence think that the claims that are being made are perhaps a bit excessive. The most that artificial intelligence will do is to flag up things for consideration by human beings. Now, where do you get these human beings, these monitors? And what seems to be happening is that the web giants themselves aren't employing the people. They're going to third parties. They're sort of outsourcing it. The outsourcers are then going to countries which have a lot of graduates but rather poor employment prospects for them, so they are cheap. And those people say they're put under a lot of pressure to make lots and lots of decisions. So you're right, Nigel. In fact, probably the web giants are going to have to spend more money on real people to do the real monitoring.
I think that's what it's going to come down to in the end, and we're going to have to start paying a bit more, I think, to use some of these services. Professor Peter Summer, thank you for coming on and talking about this issue. I've no doubt it's an issue we're going to return to very, very often indeed. Thank you. Well, the point being made there that we are already making huge efforts to stop things like child pornography from appearing on the net, although stopping it completely is pretty difficult. I'm going to go to Tracy in Attleborough in Norfolk, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Tracy.
Good evening, Nigel. Nice to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. So what's happening in America? How can there possibly have been 18 gun crimes in schools this year already?
Okay, what I actually want to say, I lived in America for 13 years, and much of it in the Midwest and Texas. Everybody I knew had guns. My husband and I had guns. The majority of the guns, it might be 150 million, are used responsibly. There's no way those guns can be called in, and only the good guys would give up the guns, not the bad guys. So it's very frustrating to me when we try to compare the UK situation to the US situation. Very different start points, very different solutions. I'm not saying that the calibre of guns can't be worked on. I think one of your previous callers talked about mental health checks. There are things that we can do, and the authorities following up. But there's no way, there's no point in talking about the calling of the guns. It'll never happen.
Tracy, I agree with you. It literally would be impossible, wouldn't it?
Absolutely impossible. Even my secretary used to carry a gun in her handbag. So, you know, the most innocent of all people. I need to ask you a question, Nigel. I've actually canvassed for you in elections, and I have enormous respect for you. How are you voting? Are you voting for Henry Bolton? And how might that impact your future?
Well, forget my future. That's pretty much irrelevant. What I think is this. I think one of the reasons that UKIP has failed so badly is because it's had a structure of government run by volunteers on an NEC who aren't up to the job. I've had a look at Henry Bolton's proposed constitution, and I'm going to decide over the next 4 hours. Is what Bolton's proposing radical enough to give UKIP a chance? And I'm considering that right now, Tracy. It is a big decision. By the way, our Twitter poll has just closed, and lots of you engage with it. 25% of you think he should stay, 75% think he should go. And Tracy, maybe that's what the result is going to be on Saturday. But thank you. I think if Bolton's reforms are good enough, whatever his flaws may be, without reform, UKIP will die. And that really is my answer to that question. It'll be a dramatic day for UKIP on Saturday. I think the party is very, very real trouble. Actually, whatever happens, it's in trouble. It's got a lot to do. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. Coming up at 10 o'clock tonight, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you very much.